Good day and welcome to the Patently Strategic Podcast, where we discuss all things at the intersection of business, technology, and patents. This podcast is a monthly discussion amongst experts in the field of patenting. It is for inventors, founders, and IP professionals alike, established or aspiring. And in today's episode, we're taking a look at what investors want in patents. Patents can have many audiences, and folks from our industry tend to focus most on the patent office and the courts. But for inventors, they often care more initially anyway about investors, and investors are going to look at patents in a very different way than an examiner or a judge would. That's the perspective we're hoping to offer in this episode. What do investors want in patents, and what do investors wish inventors knew before coming to them? This is a topic domain we've gained a fair amount of insight into, having worked with many startups at various stages of finance and funding rounds. But rather than pulling from that and filtering with any sort of bias that may come from a practitioner's point of view, we've decided to turn to the experts, so you can hear this straight from the source, directly from the perspective of accomplished investors. One of my favorite podcasts for a long time was Masters of Scale. It features intimate interviews with so many of the greats who have done it, and with the insights from their successes and failures comes quite literally billions of dollars of free advice. It's hard to imagine the magnitude of the positive impact that's had for startups in tech. It's in that spirit that we take on this topic. Innovation is best when it's efficient, and one of the best ways to be more efficient is to not make all of your own mistakes, and instead benefit from the hard-earned wisdom of others. Inventors are served by being armed with insights from investors before speaking with investors, and investors are best served when approached by inventors who are prepared and have a more strategic understanding around the role that their IP, and particularly patents, can play in their overall business strategy. This is a big topic with many different angles, so we plan on this being a regular format that we come back to from time to time. But I couldn't be more excited about this first installment. Our guest today brings the unique perspective of both inventor and investor. We're thrilled to be joined by Sridhar Iyengar. Sridhar is the CEO of Elemental Machines, makers of smart IoT products for the life sciences industry. Sridhar has a long history as a serial entrepreneur in the world of connected medical devices and wearables. His first company, Matrix, a blood glucose monitoring company, made the world's first ever medical device to directly connect to the iPhone. Under his leadership, Matrix achieved remarkable growth, securing FDA clearance for over 15 medical products, forming strategic partnerships with industry heavyweights such as Apple, Sanofi, and Walgreens, and shipping 2 billion biosensors and 6 million glucose meters. For his second act, Sridhar teamed up with John Sculley, former CEO of Apple and Pepsi, to create Misfit, a company known for creating sleek and stylish wearable products. Misfit was acquired by Fossil in 2015 for $260 million. Sridhar holds over 150 U.S. and international patents and received his PhD from Cambridge University as a Marshall Scholar. In addition to his work as a prolific inventor and founder, because who needs sleep, Sridhar is also an angel investor who has invested in over 50 startups and venture funds with an inclination towards science-based ventures. Sridhar and I are also joined today by Dr. Ashley Sloat, President and Director of Patent Strategy here at Aurora, and Dr. Sophia Lee, Patent Strategy Fellow at Aurora. Before taking you into our discussion, we do have one exciting announcement to make first. Every year since the start of the pandemic, Aurora has offered something we call the RISE Award, or Recognition for Innovative Startup Excellence. And starting now, we're officially accepting applications for its 4th annual installment. For the selected applicant, we will work closely with you and your team of inventors to provide one of the following: a free provisional U.S. patent application, or $5,000 towards a non-provisional U.S. patent application. The only requirement is that you must have an impactful innovation that you want to share with the world. We welcome applicants from all subject matter areas and zip codes. Past recipients include solo inventors, college-based teams, as well as more established startups. Eligible applications will be reviewed by an internal panel based on equal weighting of technology maturity, market relevance, economic impact, and societal impact. Winners will be announced this summer. If you'd like to learn more about the history of this award and some of its past winners, I recommend listening to our Inventor Stories episode from Season 2. To apply, please visit riseupwithaurora.com. We'll also have this link in the show notes. Now, without further ado, here's our conversation with Sridhar Iyengar. You've seen this from all relevant angles, inventor, founder, and investor. So I can't think of a better background for this conversation. On behalf of the many who are going to benefit from your hard-earned insights, thanks for taking the time and joining us today.
Sure. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure and honor to be here.
So, first question, and we say this all the time, but patents aren't right for every situation. Who should and who shouldn't be pursuing patent protection?
Um, so it's uh, so it's interesting because I've seen the value um, or lack of value as well of patents across three very different industries. So the medical device industry, the consumer products industry, and now the uh, the enterprise B2B SaaS industry that I'm doing now with my current company. Um, and it's interesting because the value of patents, and I should say more broadly, value of intellectual property. And just to be clear, in my mind, patents are one part of intellectual property, along with trademarks, copyrights, trade secrets, and so on and so
Sure.
forth. um, it really depends on the market and what your competition is like, um, and also uh, what is the basis for the moat you are trying to build. If the basis of the moat is something that is scientific or technologically very difficult, then patents could be a very good strategy. If the moat you're trying to build is something else, for example, uh, many times in pure software businesses, the moat is just building a great UI, getting a lot of users, and running really fast. And there, it's a very marketing oriented moat. And there's other, uh, especially in consumer products, it's really good design, and in that case, trademarks and copyrights and design patents might be better. But the bulk of the work that I've done historically in my career has been in very science-driven industries, and in my investing side, I have a propensity to really value hardcore science startups. So in a roundabout way, the way that I would answer that is it depends on a number of factors. And if the moat you're trying to build is actually around scientific invention, discovery, and all that, then patents are almost a must-have. I mean, it's very hard to keep all of that as trade secret and still get investors on board with it. And they're going to get skittish if you don't have a patent portfolio.
Do you have, it's kind of a follow-up, do you have any extra filters on that in terms of looking at things like enforceability,
Yeah.
ability to actually prove infringement, things
Yep.
of that nature?
Yeah. And we ran into this in both of my first and second companies. My first company, as you mentioned, was a blood glucose monitoring company, and my second one was a fitness tracker company of consumer products. Um, the One rule of thumb that I have is it's you should really not file a patent if the thing you're trying to protect, uh, if it's hard to find an infringer. um, how do you, if you protect, like, for example, a manufacturing process, well, how are you going to know if somebody's infringed that?
Mm.
Unless it's obvious from the product that's the output of that. um, and flip side is, if you make a product and it's really hard for somebody to reverse engineer or figure out how you've done it, then there's no need for you to publish in a patent filing what it is you've done. And so it really, the rule of thumb is, can you spot an infringer, or can somebody reverse engineer you from the product or object that you're selling? If the answer is no, then I would steer away from patents, because you're telling the world what you're doing behind closed doors.
Right. Yeah, that being the fundamental deal, right? The public disclosure, the enabling public disclosure.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So next one is just what roughly, as an investor,
Mhm.
what percentage of folks coming to you have first filed for IP before doing so?
Um, uh, I'd say north of north of 90% of the companies that pique my interest.
Mhm.
Some of the early stage funds that I'm an LP in, they're almost entirely focused on deep tech or things that would benefit from patent protection. I do get spammed a lot with unsolicited uh, emails, and folks like, hey, I made this app, and hey, I'm going to create this marketplace, and I mean, those could end up being very, very amazing businesses, but I just don't have the intuition or the level of comfort to be able to judge whether that's a good investment or not. But my personal interest and my personal long-term belief is there's tremendous value creation, that if you base a new venture on something that is fundamentally difficult, and oftentimes things spun out of universities will have 5, 10, 15 years of R&D, of research going into it before it gets spun out, and those have a very, very high, much better chance of being a successful venture and creating real value in this world.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess if I could fuse those two answers, the last two answers together, then it's not necessarily a requirement for somebody to have filed for IP before coming and talking to you, but it's common and oftentimes preferable depending on the case.
Yeah, and I have one investment, actually my most successful investment to date, that I made, almost 10 years ago, was I'll tell you who the company is. You'll know who it is in a minute. They came to me and they had absolutely no IP filed. It was not a technology company. Their whole differentiator was going to be ease of use and good packaging, like literally good packaging design. That was their thing. And I'm sitting there going, I totally get the problem. I've experienced, I know the problem space. I'm like, it's a great solution. There's absolutely no moat, and your differentiator is better packaging. So I finally understood what their moat was, and it was not IP. It was operations, and I won't get into all the details of that. But they had 3 years a head start on everyone, and that company got bought by Amazon for $1 billion. And that company was PillPack, and today that is Amazon Pharmacy.
Oh, wow.
And so it took me a while to figure out what their moat was, and it wasn't IP, and it wasn't a technology company. It was the fact that one of the founders, TJ, his father's family business was in the online with mail order pharmacy. So they had all the automation, infrastructure, capital, everything was already there. He was just going to be the marketing front end, the customer acquisition front end. But the other thing was, because he was leveraging his father's family business, they already had all the paperwork and permits to distribute pharmaceuticals, drugs in all 50 states. Those two things alone, they're at least 3 years ahead of anyone else.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a first to market idea. I think Walgreens and CVS had a very, very similar thing where they'd package pills, individual package, tell them what time to take it. But we knew that was not going to be an issue, because folks like Walgreens and CVS, they want people to come in. They don't want to be sending pills out. So there's a conflict of interest over there. And so it was my first unicorn exit. So it was great. And again, there's a great example of where they had absolutely no IP, and yet they created tremendous amounts of value.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
in terms of the deal on that, then they really were, from an acquisition perspective, really purchasing the know-how, right, in that infrastructure from Amazon's perspective, right? Because you typically think of M&A as purchasing IP, right? So that company can then go and do the thing or stop the process. And so in this case, the purchase was really about that infrastructure, the operations, the licensing that they had across 50 states.
Yeah, it was all that, plus I'd add in the customer base.
Right.
So for them, I wasn't obviously not involved at all on the deal side of this. I was just an angel investor. But if I had to look at the logic behind it, it was a buy versus build. How can Amazon get into the pharmacy and healthcare business quickly? It's by acquiring somebody who's already de-risked it, had the operations in place, and had the customer base, and had the brand. quite honestly. So that's that's how I looked at it. So.
I like that buy versus build.
Mhm.
So, Shrid,
Yeah.
I have a question. Do you have another angel investing cases where the IP is so important and vital for its success?
So it's interesting. I'll actually say not so much an angel investing case, but actually, if I go back to my first company, Agamatrix, I can tell you um, we had hundreds of patents filed, U.S. and international. Um, we had an interesting situation where we had um, a big pharma company. It's uh, actually it's no secret. It's Sanofi or Sanofi, depending on whether you're German or French. Um, Sanofi was looking to potentially be our customer and take our products to market. But at the same time, we were also competing for that same business with one of our suppliers. One of our suppliers supplied us a component, but they also had their full glucose monitoring system. And so, when you look at it for obvious reasons, our price was going to be higher because we're buying a component from our supplier versus all that. So, and big pharma is notorious for being very, very conscious about supplier relationships. Let's put it that way. And we ended up ultimately getting that contract, and actually our supplier also benefited because they ended up getting the supply through us as well. But one of the things that set us apart is that we had a much more robust IP portfolio than our supply. I mean, they had their own IP around their chemistry and all that, but we probably had pick a number 6 to 7 times more patents filed than they did. Now, what was interesting about this is the folks at Sanofi who were doing the due diligence, they're not going to be experts in our field. They're not going to know the ins and outs, and that this claim is super strong. This claim makes no sense. They're not going to do that. But they came at it from a macro perspective, and they said, look, if we, Sanofi, get into the blood glucose monitoring field, it's going to raise eyebrows from Abbott, Roche, Bayer, and J&J. We as Agamatrix, a small startup, we cause a little bit of nuisance in the market to these folks, but we were not the 800-pound gorilla. So Sanofi comes in, they were concerned that there would be quite a bit of attention on this, and there'd be a lot of potential resistance from the other major players. And so for them, having a very large IP portfolio gave them confidence that if needed, there could be cross-licensing opportunities and things like that. So, and the bottom line, patents you file are only very rarely are you going to assert them and throw a lot of money behind suing someone. It's just not economically sound. But you get IP in place for strategic reasons, not necessarily operational reasons. And this was a perfect example of where, and I won't say the IP portfolio was the only thing, but it was a large factor in us securing that large partnership with Sanofi. So I see IP as a much more of a strategic asset than an operational asset.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. One tie-in, you're talking about the packaging component, not being necessarily like a hugely strategic differentiator. I was just reading a post you had on Medium though about how the people choose cars based on cup holders, and it was the color aspect of the packaging on the competitor's monitor that actually ended up being a pretty big strategic differentiator. So it's crazy that sometimes that stuff, even though maybe it's not the patentable aspect, can still play a huge role in the overall market success.
So I'm really glad you brought this up, because here's the reality versus perception versus reality. As an investor, you can't come and say, well, our differentiator is that we have better colors. We have more colors. And yet, if I go back to my second company, Misfit, the thing that really accelerated our growth was the fact that we had different colors. Now, and I'll tell you a little bit, there's more to the story on this, but going to an investor and saying, we're going to make a consumer product, and our differentiator is it's going to look pretty and have multiple colors. How's that sound? You're not going to get investment because so we had to actually file IP on. We actually did some machine learning and AI work to on the algorithm side on the fitness trackers to actually understand when somebody's taking steps and when they're sleeping and all that. But if you look at reality, for every dollar that we spent making a new color, we were able to get about $100 back in revenue within a year. It's like $25,000-$30,000 to make a new color and about $2 to $3 million in revenue per color. Because it wasn't just about the colors, and because what the colors allowed us to do is to form very, very strong brand partnerships. And I can't take any credit for this. This was all my business partner, Sonny, who's brilliant at these kinds of these marketing things. So, for example, Best Buy, they ended up getting two colors, blue and yellow. We got their corporate colors, or I believe we call them champagne and topaz. Again, this is Sonny's brilliance in marketing and positioning. Coca-Cola got red, Victoria's Secret got pink, Speedo got white. So a lot of these major brands, we gave them exclusive rights to a particular color that resonated with their brand, and that's what really grew. That was a big part of our distribution and awareness through that. But if you go to an investor and say, well, that's what we're going to do, that doesn't seem defensible. And yet, yet it is from an execution standpoint. So not from a patenting standpoint, but it is yet another barrier, another moat. So,
sure, makes a lot of sense. So you've talked about value, several times, and the value that patents can bring. Big part of investing is valuation. That valuation happens at a time, unfortunately, though, when very little is known or certain. But a patent is an asset in hand. How do you go about placing a value on a patent when assessing the overall valuation?
So we kind of don't. We don't place value on the patent itself because a lot of times the patent is still pending. It's still in application form. It hasn't been granted yet. So again, our sweet spot on the investing side is seed and pre-seed. So at that point, unless it's come out of a university and there's a licensing arrangement in place, most of the startups we work with have a handful of patents they've filed but haven't been granted. So it's hard to place value on the patent before it's granted. But what's far more interesting and far more important is their thought process around intellectual property. So what we end up doing is we review the patents, we look at some of the landscape, we see, what are the other folks in this area doing, and how are they thinking about what their core values are. They, some folks say, well, here's the core invention, but it's so hard for anyone to reverse engineer or find that we're going to keep this as trade secret, and instead we're going to patent all the outward facing applications that we built on this, and that shows a level of sophistication. Whereas you have other folks that say, we invented this, we're going to put we filed one patent on this, and we look at that and we say, that's it. And kudos to them for in creating something, but are they sophisticated in their thought process and how they're going to protect their core value? I think that's the more important thing that we focus on at this early stage. Now, if you go down to Series B and Series C investors, they're going to look at it very differently and say, how many patents have been granted? How many times have they been cited, or this or that, and all that. But at the early angel stage and at the early seed and pre-seed stage, it's more, how are they thinking about protecting their intellectual property? That's far better indicator than the actual patent itself.
With that, do you think then there's value? Because I know there's obviously expedited processing that companies can go through. Do you think for the relative cost versus value? Do you think companies should be trying to do expedited processing, or do you think it's not worth, the juice isn't worth the squeeze?
Again, it depends on the nature of the business, but if there is something worth protecting, then I would say spend the extra, what is it, $1,000 or $2,000 to get it ahead of the queue or something like that. I would be very, very, so the simple answer is yes. I would encourage that, because it's not a lot of money, but again, if you only have $100,000 in the bank, then 1 to 2,000 per patent is a lot of money. But I would definitely say if you have the budget, and the kind of invention or a discovery you have is very, very scientifically novel, then spend the extra $1 or $2,000, get accelerated, so you have it when you go to investors.
I think there was a really interesting point in there too, about a patent really kind of being a material manifestation of a company and an inventor's values versus, not just what you want to hear as a particular investor with a particular angle, but it's very much a material stake in the ground around what they're prioritizing. It's very interesting.
Yes, it really it goes to it reveals a lot about the founders and how they think about the value they're creating. Are they really thinking about this strategically and deeply? Are they playing checkers, or are they playing chess? And there's all these different ways of really extracting patents. Extracting IP and value out of someone's invention. And there's all these different strategies to try and kind of put barricades around. It's kind of like an onion, layer after layer after layer. You can keep the core as a trade secret, but then the applications you start layering on top of that. So the way they think about it, I think, is far more important, at least to me.
Absolutely.
So can I ask 2 questions here, Shrid?
Mm-hmm.
So when we're looking at, so you mentioned about university spin-outs, right? So most of these spin-outs basically have an exclusive licensing from the school of like a core invention, right? So it's like a new process or a new like engineering like products. So in those cases, this kind of fits into the one that you mentioned of like they patent their core. Right? So in this case, what should these people be thinking about in terms of building their IP strategy and how to align their business model with it?
It's, again, the question for a founder or entrepreneur to think about is, why do they need to protect their invention, and or their core value? Like, what is it? Again, patents aren't the answer to everything. Oftentimes it could be branding, it could be copyrights and trademarks and all that. But from, I think, the theme in this discussion here is that how should we look at this from an investor standpoint as well? What do investors care about? And I'm going to be a little rogue here. Most investors aren't going to understand a damn thing about your IP. And I'd like to think that I know a little bit of something about life sciences, but there's so many patents and so many companies I come across. When I try to, read their patents, I'm like, it kind of makes sense logically, but I have no idea what the other 1,000 patents in this field say. And so to actually go through and say, well, this invention is so much heads and shoulders better than everything else out there, well, that takes weeks, if not months, of diligence, and no investor is going to do that. And so I think a much better use of time is to, patent what you think can be stolen through reverse engineering, or that way you can infringe in what you can spot in an infringer very easily. But then when comes time to pitch this to the investor, to really talk about the rest of the landscape. And I think so many times I've seen a pitch deck and they talk about their invention. They don't, and they talk about, oh, we're better than the other competitor because of this data set and this data set, this data set. But nobody talks about the IP landscape. They always talk about the data. Well, our data is, at 85%, and everyone else is at 30%. Okay, well, you have 3 patents you filed. Do you have freedom to operate? Have you even thought about that? And what did you have to navigate around? And who else is working in this space? They could have absolutely no data at all. Like, you could invent something or discover something, and then there could be nobody else on the market that has something similar, but there could be hundreds of patents that are kind of surrounding what you're doing. So do you have room to expand your invention? Are you blocked? Nobody really talks about that, and I don't expect a first-time entrepreneur to even think like that. But from an investor standpoint, understanding the IP landscape around your discovery is something that I rarely see in pitch decks. And if there's one thing that I like an entrepreneur to do, yes, I get the data is great. Tell me about your IP in the context of your IP landscape.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of inventors put in a competitive landscape from a product perspective,
Correct.
which I get, but I also feel like it can be skewed, right? Because I can focus on whatever aspects of whatever other products I want to show that we're different, right? Yep. But the patent landscape doesn't lie, right? It's right. Because it's the written description that's out there. It's the yep. what people spelled out, and so having that going through that thought process and really convincing yourself that there's something more there than what exists currently, at least in the landscape, I think is really important.
Yep, 100%.
So I think it's a pretty good segue, and this might be a smidge redundant, but I'm gonna ask it anyway, just depending on how this actually plays out, post production. But you mentioned that not all investors are going to be particularly IP savvy. It's hard to be an expert in all of the subject matters, but what sort of diligence do you perform with regard to IP, and like how do you assess the quality of a patent? And the for instances on that are claims that are too broad and the application is going to be more vulnerable to prior art, too narrow, and it can easily be designed around. Well-crafted patents a lot more likely to hold up to the scrutiny of courts in the PTAB. How do you go about separating the pretenders from the contenders?
So again, one of the big challenges of early stage investing is many patents aren't granted yet, and so the best you can do is read through the spec and say, is the specification written in a way that allows multiple claims and multiple inventions to be drawn out? I mean, there's a pretty, as you know, there's a very well-trodden path where you put everything in the kitchen sink into the spec to save on filing fees, and then you break those out into different claim sets down the road. So it's just a way to save money. So one thing that I look for is, is a spec written in a way that potentially different inventions are all clumped together, and that's something that I ask the entrepreneurs directly as well, and say, hey, how have you written your patents? Do you have everything in one that you can break off later? And I'd say half the folks understand that strategy and as a cost saving measure, and they do that, and I'm like, great, at least you're thinking about it. And the other half haven't learned that yet. And so for me, reading a set of claims is not very useful, because you could tweak one or two words and maybe you could work around it. What I end up doing is I try to match what they're pitching in terms of their data and their product and their invention, and match that to how have they protected that, at least in the specification side. And then the next question is, if you didn't exist as an organization or a company, or your technology or science didn't exist, what's the next best thing that's out there? That you invented something and you're trying to sell this to your customers. If you didn't exist, what would your customers do, or buy if you didn't exist? and then I'll go into a narrative about, oh, well, they'd be doing X, Y, Z, and say, okay, well, how much better is your invention than this, and where have you show me where you've protected it. Now, that of course takes a lot of time to do so. So in this day and age, I don't do a lot of direct angel investing because it takes time. But a few years ago, that was more my approach, was matching what they've written in their patents. If they had claims that are granted, great. Otherwise, in the spec, with what they're claiming their product that are invention can actually do, and see is there some level of traceability between them.
Now, are there any red flags you look for?
On the patenting side, I'd say the main red flag would be if they filed one patent. So yes, we patented our discovery. And then when you dig into it, it turns out that it's a narrow claim set or narrow invention. Now, again, going back to what I just said before, some people will say like, yeah, there's 5 inventions we've crammed into one patent to save on filing costs. So that makes sense. But if somebody said, yeah, we invented this thing and we just filed one patent on it, that's all they have, then you can do a little bit more digging. This is a one-trick pony. But more often than not, there'll be 2 or 3 that's filed, and they'll say, okay, they'll talk to me about, well, here's thing that we've discovered, and we filed this part of it over here, we filed this part of it over here, and this part of it we're going to file, and we're still trying to put the pieces together. So if they can articulate the vision for a portfolio, that's great. But if somebody says, oh, we filed a patent on it, and then you hear crickets, they're not really thinking about it strategically. And I have come across several folks who kind of think, oh, I just need to file a patent and I'm done. I'm like, not really. What's your patent strategy? And if they can answer that, great. But sometimes they ask me, what do you mean by patent strategy? And that's a little bit of a red flag.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like it from prior answers, but it does sound like you do like to see freedom to operate opinion and potentially a patentability search.
Yeah. The patentability I'm less concerned about. The freedom to operate, or FTO, it's not a must-have, because again, doing an FTO will take time and cash away from the startup. But you don't need a independent FTO done. If they themselves have done an FTO, at least they can talk about it. It won't be an official, council-generated FTO document, but at least they're aware of it. I mean, there's folks who are not even aware that they need to look at an FTO, and even, just understanding what a patent is. A patent doesn't give you the right to do something; it stops other people from doing it. And even understanding that the definition of what a patent is helps. And you'd be surprised how many first-time founders and inventors don't actually understand that concept. So those are some additional red flags.
We wouldn't be surprised. We see that. We see it.
I'm sure you see it all the time.
It's a huge part of the educational things that we do, in our webinars and even on this podcast, is like breaking down that distinction, because there's a lot of nuance, but it is huge difference. So this next question, this is largely an inventor education piece. So, I know the answer to this question for most investors, but I think it comes as a surprise to many inventors newer to the process. Are you willing to sign NDAs when inventors and startups come to you with pitches?
So me personally, never. Most of the funds that I'm an LP in, never or rarely. Certainly not on the first meeting. It's usually when people ask for that, what I say, or what the funds I'm involved in say, is that, well, can you share something that's non-confidential? And the answer is no. We have something that's so proprietary we can't share with you. Then we'd say, okay, well, thanks, good luck. And part of the reason is, if your invention is, if you need an NDA at this stage to protect your invention, then what you're signaling is that once you tell somebody what it is, it's pretty easy to copy. That's what you're signaling. Or on the flip side, on the investor side, we see so many pitch decks and all that if you come to us and we sign an NDA, and then we 2 months later we come across another pitch deck from somebody's doing something competitor, and we invest in them, then there's a potential risk that a liability that we've opened ourselves up to. So the simple answer is no. Now, that being said, you go further down, you go to the Series B and Series C investors. Many of them will sign NDAs. I've had folks in my current company. I've had later stage investors who, without me even asking, said, can you give us access to your data room and we'll sign an NDA. And then what we did here was, because we just closed the Series B, we just had the NDA as part of the login or the sign in for the data room. And later stage, it's a lot more expected and accepted, mainly because you're sharing a lot of more sensitive financial information, competitive information, customer information. Honestly, it's not about the IP. It's not about the invention. At that point, what you're protecting in an NDA is commercially sensitive information, not scientifically sensitive information.
Makes a lot of sense. So, there's the vetting of the portfolio, but then there's the vetting of the owners of the IP. And we've talked about this. We've talked about this some for sure. But what sort of questions do you ask inventors in sort of trying to suss out their relative level of sophistication around IP?
Again, at very early stage companies, I don't expect a lot of sophistication, but I expect some base level. One of the things we ask them, not about the IP, but just about their discovery inventions, we ask them, why is this hard? Tell us why this is really, really hard, and why was it hard for you to discover or invent, and why is it going to be hard for somebody else? And then we try to tie that back to say, okay, well, how have you protected that hard thing or hard things? So again, it's that traceability. If they say this is hard and they protected this, it's like, okay, why? Now it could be that, well, this is really hard and we're keeping a trade secret and we're protecting this over here, and then that's fine as long as they have logic around it. So a large part of the evaluation of early stages, are you thinking about this the right way? Are you thinking about the strategy around how to protect? It doesn't mean that you invented this, you got to protect this. It's what's the risk reward? What's your real value, and how are you looking at the risk of either exposing that real value to the public via patent or keeping it trade secret? And so have they thought about it? Have they thought through the risk reward? That's probably the most important thing that for me, I look at.
So if we haven't covered it already, what's the one piece of IP related advice you wish you could give to every inventor before pitching to you?
So this is gonna sound kind of funny because it's gonna be counterintuitive to what I just said. It is generally better to have more patents than less patent headcount. And the reason I say that is many investors aren't going to understand the ins and outs and in-depth implications of your IP. So if you got two companies that kind of look the same and one's got 2 patents and one's got 15, there's obviously something more appealing over here. It could be that these 15 are just total nonsense patents, and these 2 here are the core. But at first glance, that helps. I mean, having an IP portfolio is a marketing exercise at the very, very early stages of fundraising, and I think that's something to be aware of. And the fact that intellectual property is not just patents, and I think that's you need to entrepreneurs need to realize that when they talk about their IP portfolio, patents is one item out of all that. And if you just have 2 patents, but it covers 10 inventions, then that's how you should write it. You should say our IPs, these 10 inventions, these 5 are covered by patent number 1, these 5 are covered by patent number 2. Put a table out there. Otherwise, you got 2 patents, and you're like, all right, that's it. But now you have 10 inventions that you've packaged into 2 patents for for cost purposes. But then you have trade secrets. List what your trade secrets are without giving them away. Things like, you know, uh, we have unique expertise in XYZ manufacturing technique or something like that without saying what it is. Then you have trademarks. You have utility patents and design patents. Then another part of intellectual property is any proprietary data you have. A lot of AI-driven companies, a huge part of their secret sauce is is a proprietary data set. So really, instead of saying your IP is we have these 2 patents, you list out a table of 25 things. Here's our 10 inventions. Here's our 2 patents covering. Here's trademarks. Here's trade secrets. Here's copyrights, if it makes sense. And here's all of our different data sets. So presenting that as a comprehensive intellectual property portfolio comes across as far more sophisticated than saying, here's a couple of patents we filed. So think about your IP portfolio as a marketing tool when you go to pitch to early stage investors. Because I can tell you right now, early stage investors, because they see so many different companies, they're not going to have time to dig into the ins and outs. So think of it as a narrative and as a marketing exercise.
Sure. Makes a lot of sense. So flipping the perspective just a little bit, what IP related advice would you give to those newer to investing?
Don't place too much emphasis on patents at that early stage. And the reason for that is very often companies will pivot. When you come in as a seed or a pre-seed investor, by the time they get to Series B, they may have pivoted. But I think to qualify that a little bit, it's less about what they've actually protected and far more about, are the founders thinking strategically, and intellectual property and patenting is one of those dimensions, but there's obviously multiple dimensions. If it is a very, very scientific endeavor, like something that's being spun out of a university research, then looking at the licensing arrangements and whether or not those royalties are going to, how they're structured, so the business implications of that. The other thing that's you watch out for is university related patents often are not written the best. They're often kind of rubber stamped. So I know that from a previous life where we were trying to license something from a university, and I'm looking at that going, that's not how I would have written it. And the main inventor there said, yeah, the technology licensing office have their own IP agent, patent agents who draft it. And, it's just like, all right, you're not thinking about the business implication. You're just kind of rubber stamping it. No, but all joking aside, if I think the biggest red flag would be a science and technology based startup that says, well, we're not filing patents. We want to keep everything as trade secret. That's a red flag, because first of all, they don't understand how to play the IP game, because right. And keeping it all as trade secret, whilst like for example, the Coca-Cola formula, that's a trade secret, but the core value in Coca-Cola is not their secret formula; it's their marketing engine, that marketing and distribution logistics. Because look at all the other products that Coca-Cola sells. It's not just their Coke Classic. Their engine, the core competence is marketing, logistics, and all that. So if a founder comes to you as an investor and says, hey, we're keeping everything as trade secret because we have very, very unique science, how's an acquirer going to get comfort with that? Because if it's such critical trade secret, they're probably not going to reveal it in enough depth, in enough detail to an acquiring company. So you look at the exit and say, are these really the founders that are going to play nice with an acquirer? And will I get a return on my investment on this? And so again, understanding the intellectual property broadly is part of your company's currency. You obviously have your revenue, you have your customer base, you got this, you got that, but you have your intellectual property. It is an asset, and they need to treat it as an asset. And so having that sophistication and understanding is something that I would encourage early investors to look out for and probe with potential startups.
It's a little bit of a tell on the chess versus checkers piece too, around not thinking about using different offensive and defensive strategies, as well as just protecting the idea. So, we get a lot of questions about IP budget management. Someone with over 150 patents, you've definitely seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, I'm sure. Do you have any preference on the use of big name brand law versus, potentially smaller, more cost-effective firms? And do you have any thoughts on, patent agents versus attorneys, closest to subject matter, that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So, at my first company, Agamatrix, we had a boutique firm with 2 or 3 attorneys, and they had very, very good domain expertise in our field, and so I greatly benefited working with them because they were scientifically they knew the science of what we were doing, and they'd operated in this field for a long time, and so had very, very good relationship with them. And then when we went off to Misfit, we went with one of the big name firms, and they're absolutely fine. No issue there. But one of the things that I found in those big name firms is, for 6 months, you end up working with sort of like, there's like the lead person, but then the junior person that you work with, every 6 months or 9 months, that person might change. So whilst you had the relationship with the lead attorney, the person you had a day-to-day relationship with may change after a year. And what I found there was, if I didn't have to go very, very deep into the patent strategy, that was fine. And in our second company, Misfit, we were a consumer products company. Our IP, we didn't have a very, very deep IP strategy, sort of deep patenting strategy, and that was absolutely fine. I don't want to say it was transactional, because we obviously had a long-term relationship with the senior person, but if you're filing a number of patents and you want, these half dozen to mesh well with these half dozen over here, that can take 3 or 4 years to build. And having the same person who understands, oh yeah, 3 years ago you did this, and that means you should be doing this, and that gives you that other layer. That continuity was very important. And I've gotten back to my first firm at here at Elemental, because I value that continuity and the implications. So things that we thought about 4 or 5 years ago, we now can build on top of, because we had the relationship with the same attorney. I've never used a patent agent, so I can't really comment on that, because we work with a very small boutique firm.
Excellent. Yeah, we think a lot about the domain expertise, but the continuity point is a great one. Okay. And I'm going to cut you loose so you have a chance to bio break or something like that before your next stop. But if we ever have the opportunity, totally off topic for this, I would love to pick your brain on the opportunity to have interfaced with Steve Jobs and then to have worked with John Scully. That has to have been, you have to have some really, really interesting perspective from that.
There is, and I unfortunately have not actually met Steve Jobs. But I do know he used our product, because our glucometer. We got word from somebody who reported directly to him that Steve was impressed with the design of what we had done, because we use the same design language that the iPhone 3, iPhone 4 had back in the day. But yeah, I would love to have a separate conversation about that as well.
Yeah, look forward to that very much. Well, Thank you so much for your time. Really, really, really appreciate it.
Awesome. All right. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye now.
Thank you, Srid.
Yep. Bye.
All right. That's all for today, folks. Thanks for listening. And remember to check us out at aurorapatents.com for more great podcasts, blogs, and videos covering all things patent strategy. And if you're an agent or attorney and would like to be part of the discussion, or an inventor with a topic you'd like to hear discussed, email us at podcast@aurorapatents.com. Do remember that this podcast does not constitute legal advice, and until next time, keep calm and patent on.